Sometimes what we call evil does not arrive loudly. It doesn't always come with violence or obvious cruelty. More often, it comes quietly, through dismissal, manipulation, neglect, and silence. And when God begins to expose it, the first thing we usually feel is not clarity, it's discomfort. Exposure does not begin with pointing fingers or assigning blame. It begins quietly, internally, with a subtle shift in awareness. Before the mind forms conclusions, the body often knows that something is wrong. There is a tension, a fatigue, a sense of unease that appears without clear explanation. This is not imagination, nor is it weakness. It is perception awakening. When awareness rises, it does not accuse, it observes. It notices patterns, emotional reactions, and inconsistencies that were previously ignored in the name of peace, loyalty, or survival. Accusation seeks certainty and control, but awareness seeks truth. Accusation rushes to judgment, while awareness stays present with what is being felt. Many people were conditioned early in life to doubt their inner experience, especially if acknowledging it once threatened their sense of belonging or safety. As a result, they learn to silence discomfort and explain away harm. Awareness gently interrupts this pattern. It asks not, who is wrong, but what is happening within me right now? When awareness grows, it often brings confusion before clarity. Old narratives begin to loosen. Behaviors that once seemed normal start to feel heavy or intrusive. This is not a failure of faith or character. It is the nervous system recalibrating to truth. Awareness allows reality to surface without forcing a confrontation prematurely. It creates space for understanding instead of reaction. True exposure happens when denial is no longer needed for emotional survival. It occurs when a person can remain grounded while seeing clearly. From this place, truth emerges naturally. No attack is required. No justification is necessary. What is unhealthy reveals itself through its impact, not through accusation. Awareness restores discernment. It returns authority to inner knowing rather than external permission. In this state, clarity is not aggressive, yet it is unmistakable. The truth stands on its own, quietly undeniable, once the eyes are open and the body is finally allowed to speak. What causes the deepest harm is rarely what shocks us. It is what feels familiar. Patterns that repeat over time often escape scrutiny because they resemble what we have always known. When something is repeated enough, it becomes normalized, and normalization dulls awareness. Harm does not need to be dramatic to be damaging. It only needs to be consistent. Control can look like concern. Manipulation can feel like protection. Neglect can hide behind independence. These patterns are especially powerful when they are wrapped in roles, traditions, or expectations that are socially accepted or spiritually justified. Familiarity creates a false sense of safety. The nervous system often prefers what is known over what is healthy, especially when early life required adaptation to unstable or emotionally unsafe environments. People learn to tolerate what hurts because it once ensured connection or survival. Over time, endurance is mistaken for strength, and silence is mistaken for peace. In such environments, harmful dynamics become invisible, not because they are absent, but because they are predictable. Evil hides effectively in these patterns because it does not announce itself. It blends in. It benefits from routine and from the belief that questioning what is familiar is disloyal or ungrateful. When someone begins to feel discomfort within a long, standing pattern, it is often dismissed as overthinking or ingratitude. This dismissal reinforces the cycle, keeping truth buried beneath habit. As awareness deepens, what was once tolerated begins to feel heavy. Emotional exhaustion appears without obvious cause. The cost of maintaining the pattern becomes harder to ignore. This is often the moment when truth starts to surface, not as accusation, but as recognition. The realization is not sudden, it unfolds slowly, as the gap between what is endured and what is healthy becomes impossible to reconcile. Familiarity loses its authority, and the pattern reveals itself not by intention, but by impact. As clarity replaces conditioning and perception sharpens beyond habit, long before the mind forms explanations or conclusions, the body is already responding to what is real. A tightening in the chest, a heaviness in the stomach, shallow breathing, or sudden fatigue often appear without a clear mental story. These responses are not random. They are the body's language, shaped by experience and designed for protection. The body records what the mind once had to ignore in order to cope. While thoughts can be persuaded, delayed, or rationalized, the nervous system reacts instantly to perceived safety or threat. The mind is skilled at creating narratives that preserve stability. It explains away discomfort, reframes harm as misunderstanding, and intellectualizes pain to avoid disruption. This is especially true when acknowledging truth would threaten relationships, identity, or belonging. The body, however, does not negotiate with denial. It responds honestly, even when honesty feels inconvenient. Anxiety, tension, and restlessness often emerge when reality contradicts the story the mind is trying to maintain. Many people were taught early to override bodily signals. Hunger was dismissed, tears were discouraged, fear was labeled weakness. Over time, this conditioning created a split between awareness and sensation. Learning to listen again requires slowing down and paying attention without judgment. When the body reacts strongly to certain people, environments, or conversations, it is offering information, not drama. It is indicating that something does not align with safety, authenticity, or truth. As awareness grows, bodily responses become clearer. Patterns emerge. The same exhaustion follows the same interactions. The same tension appears in the same spaces. These repetitions are not coincidence. They are messages waiting to be acknowledged. When the body is finally heard, clarity follows naturally. The mind begins to understand what the body has known all along. Trusting this process does not mean abandoning reason. It means allowing wisdom to flow from sensation to understanding. The body does not speak in words, but its language is precise, consistent, and grounded in lived reality, revealing truth not through argument but through sensation, presence, and an undeniable call to pay attention. When boundaries are absent, relationships often feel smooth on the surface. Expectations remain unspoken, roles stay fixed, and patterns continue without challenge. The moment a boundary is introduced, something shifts. What was once tolerated is no longer available, and this change brings reactions. Boundaries are not acts of aggression, they are acts of clarity. They reveal how others relate to your autonomy, your needs, and your right to self-respect. The response to a boundary often tells more truth than years of behavior without one. Those who benefit from your silence, compliance, or emotional availability may experience your boundary as a threat, not because the boundary is unreasonable, but because it disrupts an unspoken agreement. Resistance can appear as guilt, anger, withdrawal, or sudden accusations of selfishness. These reactions are not random. They reflect a loss of access, control, or comfort. When someone values you primarily for what you provide rather than who you are, limits expose that imbalance. Healthy relationships may feel challenged by boundaries, but they adjust. They may require conversation, patience, and mutual understanding. Unhealthy dynamics, however, rely on your lack of limits to survive. When a boundary appears, the hidden intentions within the relationship surface. The need to dominate, manipulate, or avoid responsibility becomes visible. This is not a failure of communication, it is information. Many people fear setting boundaries because they were conditioned to equate love with self-erasure. They learned that safety depended on being agreeable and low maintenance. When they finally assert a need, the resulting resistance can trigger doubt and shame. Yet this moment is crucial. The discomfort is not evidence of wrongdoing. It is evidence of change. Boundaries do not create conflict, they expose it. They bring clarity where confusion once lived. They transform invisible expectations into visible truths. When resistance appears, it offers an opportunity to see relationships as they are, not as they were hoped to be. In this clarity, self-trust strengthens, discernment sharpens, and the difference between connection and control becomes impossible to ignore. Grief often arrives unexpectedly, not only in response to loss, but in moments of truth. When what has been hidden is revealed, grief emerges as a natural response to seeing clearly. It is not simply about what was taken away, but about what was endured, misunderstood, or denied for a long time. Revelation brings awareness, and awareness brings mourning for the years spent surviving what should never have been normalized. This grief is not a sign of weakness or lack of faith. It is a sign that illusion has fallen away. Divine revelation does not only illuminate what is wrong, it reveals what mattered. Grief arises when the heart recognizes how deeply something affected it. It acknowledges the cost of silence, endurance, and self-abandonment. Many people were taught to bypass grief by reframing pain as purpose or punishment. In doing so, they skip the necessary emotional reckoning that allows healing to occur. Grief slows the process down. It insists that truth be felt, not just understood. There is a sacred quality to this kind of grief. It clears the space where denial once lived. It softens the defenses that were built to survive confusion and harm. Through grief, the nervous system releases what it could not process at the time. Tears, heaviness, and sadness become expressions of integration rather than collapse. They mark the moment when reality is finally allowed to register fully. This grief does not demand immediate answers or resolutions. It asks for presence. It invites compassion toward the self that endured without knowing better options were possible. In this way, grief becomes a bridge between revelation and renewal. It transforms knowledge into wisdom by grounding it in the body and the heart. What is grieved no longer needs to be repeated. What is felt no longer needs to be carried unconsciously. Through grief, truth settles deeply, creating the conditions for dignity, discernment, and a more honest way of living that honors what has been seen and cannot be unseen. When exposure occurs, the initial reaction is often fear. Fear of loss, fear of conflict, fear of standing alone. This fear is understandable because exposure disrupts familiar structures, even when those structures were harmful. Yet exposure is not meant to destabilize for the sake of destruction. It is an invitation to realign with what is true, healthy, and life-giving. What is revealed is not appearing to punish, but to guide. Alignment begins when a person stops negotiating with reality. When the truth becomes visible, pretending otherwise requires enormous energy. Exposure reduces this burden. It allows the nervous system to relax its vigilance, no longer tasked with maintaining denial. What follows is not chaos, but coherence. Thoughts, emotions, and bodily responses begin to move in the same direction. This is alignment, a state where inner experience and outer choices no longer contradict each other. Fear thrives in confusion and fragmentation. When parts of the self are forced to stay silent, fear grows because something essential is being ignored. Exposure brings those parts into awareness. It restores internal dialogue and self-trust. Rather than reacting impulsively, a person becomes more grounded, more discerning, and more present. The clarity that follows exposure is often quiet, steady, and deeply stabilizing. Alignment does not require dramatic action. It begins with small, honest shifts, choosing truth over appeasement, choosing rest over constant striving, choosing integrity over image. These choices may feel unfamiliar, but they carry a sense of rightness that fear cannot override. Exposure does not demand perfection or immediate change. It asks for willingness to see and to respond with sincerity. As alignment deepens, fear loses its authority. Decisions are no longer driven by the need to avoid discomfort, but by the desire to live in accordance with what has been revealed. Life becomes less about managing appearances and more about honoring reality. In this state, exposure is recognized not as a threat, but as a turning point where confusion gives way to clarity and truth becomes a steady compass rather than a source of anxiety. And remember, evil loses its power the moment it is seen clearly. So don't rush the discomfort. Don't silence the inner knowing. Don't gaslight yourself back into familiar suffering. Pay attention, because what God is revealing now is not meant to destroy you. It's meant to bring you home to yourself.